Resident Evil has never been afraid to morph with the times, evolving with trends as the years went along. Having covered a bulk of the mainline games on the channel thus far, minus some of the spin-offs, I've watched and seen this franchise transform from a slow-paced, tension-filled excursion into a globe-trotting, action-packed gore-fest. But with Resident Evil 7, Capcom took a brand new direction in its survival horror franchise, a soft reboot in most regards, taking the franchise closer to its roots while changing how the game is fundamentally played. But with all these changes made, was Resident Evil 7 actually good? And how does it fare compared to its last 8 contemporaries that released prior? Well, let's find out. If you enjoy this type of retrospective content on games and series of titles, you're in the right place. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, as I hear that if you do, you may find a $20 bill on the ground soon if you smash it. And seeing as how around 6% of you are actually subscribed, I guess none of you want to find any extra money. Correct that today. But for now, let's smash these yellow painted crates, wolf down some intestines, and hop into Resident Evil 7. Just a quick editor's note before we get into the video. I've been suffering from a cold that seemingly won't go away, so I may sound a little bit more stuffy and nasally than normal, so I apologize in advance. Thank you guys for understanding, and now let's hop into Resident Evil 7.
You were right. I did lie to you. I shouldn't have. All I can say is that if you get this, stay away.
In 2015, PlayStation VR owners were treated to a demo only known as Kitchen. In this, we play as an unknown player strapped into a chair with a video camera pointed at ourselves, while essentially watching a murder and subsequently our own through a female character. This tech demo is one of many released at the time as a marketing blitz for the machine to promote the newest headset in the VR race. Capturing the attention of people around the world, having a horror experience in VR brought a whole new sense of terror to a video game. At no point was there an inclination that this was really a tech demo for something that would eventually become Resident Evil 7. In June 2016 at the PlayStation E3 showcase, we get the first trailer for Resident Evil 7, specifically referencing the kitchen trailer that we played prior, as someone walked through the same kitchen as the VR demo itself. With Resident Evil 7 being fully VR compatible, Capcom set out to create a realistic first-person horror experience, taking the franchise back to its roots that was in Resident Evil 1. From the demo itself, it is clear that this new direction for the Resident Evil franchise was created to take what we know and love from the franchise itself and modify it with all the trappings and experiences the gaming scene had provided when it came to horror, taking influence from games like Amnesia, Outlast, and most obvious of all, PT, or playable teaser, for the now cancelled Silent Hill reboot. Releasing a playable demo for the first portion of the house we will see in the final game, millions of fans were scouring the demo for weeks for hidden ghosts, Easter eggs, and any bit of information that could be gleaned from the demo itself on the direction this new Resident Evil game would be taking. It hit all the benchmarks as well. Great sound design, hyper environmental realism, puzzles, and the slow plodding footsteps through the hallways of what we know as the Baker Estate. But the most captivating aspect of all was the playable VHS tapes, allowing players to experience the past rather than how most games tend to do it, where you either just watch or listen. Needless to say, this demo created a ton of hype for not only Resident Evil 7 itself, but for the PlayStation VR as well. In January of 2017, only a 6-month gap between announce and release, I got my hands on this game to brave the horrors within. We play as Ethan Winters, who receives a mysterious message from his lady love Mia, where there is obviously something wrong going on, specifically with her, telling him to stay away. As most men would do, we ignore the warning and go off into the swamps of Louisiana to find her. Approaching the estate, we get the usual trappings of any horror game: mutilated animals, pagan ritualistic deer heads hanging on branches, locked gates, figures walking into the seemingly abyss, until we make our way inside the house. The same house from the demo, in fact, armed with nothing but your good looks and charm. While exploring, we locate the same videotape, and by playing through it, watching this TV crew seemingly get mutilated and hunted along the way, to discover a handle that leads to the basement. Navigating the basement of the guest house, we find some bodies, clippings of missing persons reports, blood, and best of all, Mia. Naturally, she is manic from being locked in a cage underneath this creepy house surrounding dead bodies, bloods, and torture devices, but there are some odd idiosyncrasies in her words, referring to someone as daddy, and confused of what message Ethan received as she has no memories of making it. Looking for a way out, something snatches Mia through the wall, and as Ethan continues to search for her, we find her crawling out of the basement we just left, with something obviously wrong. After a stabbing, beating your girlfriend with an axe, all of it culminating into Ethan getting his hand cut off with a chainsaw,
Gotcha. Must contain outbreak. Gonna win, I promise. Must burn it all down.
all in first person, and more importantly VR by the way, Mia scuttles off into the attic like a mutated grump. By now, Ethan should probably be leaving the house, as most people would do, if anything, to get that nubbin he just now got taken care of, seeing as how you should always pick up your hand. However, as in any good horror movie, our hero continues to chase the hand-cutting culprit, essentially putting some rounds into her with a 9mm he finds in a shelf somewhere and gets knocked out by a grown man wearing wellies. There is a ton in this intro sequence to Resident Evil 7 that I truly admire, and as a snapshot of the game itself, executes almost perfectly into dragging the player into the horror. This game is the first in the Resident Evil franchise to bring the horror to the forefront, most notably through the means of changing the perspective down to a first-person camera. Now, Resident Evil diehards will point to games like Umbrella Corp and say, yeah, that was a first-person game, and they would be right. However, built as a first-person shooter with no tension whatsoever, as well as having sold extremely poorly to the fact that nobody remembers it, I think it's fair to say that 7 brought the core of the franchise to the first-person perspective, and it really works in its favor for the series. Being third-person for so long, there is always a separation between character and player, not allowing things like gore and jump scares to be nearly as effective as they are in first person. Playing the game through Ethan's eyes really enhances this horror and tension built up through the intimacy and closeness that brings an unease of moving forward, much like how you may have been scared to walk down a dark hallway as a kid because you were afraid of dark. Not knowing what could be lurking around the next corner or dark hallway really ratchets up the tension and release required horror games today, something that was lost when Capcom moved away from the forced perspective of the original games. Resident Evil 7 does a lot to play with this as well, as the inclusion of VR, waving items in the player's face consistently, you know, those VR trappings that we've come to know and love. When Ethan gets his hand cut off, for example, he holds it up to his face, allowing the player to see and experience the blood squirting from the cut veins in pretty gruesome detail. Aiming for graphical realism in Resident Evil 7 was a major standout for me in this game, even 6 years later. This game is still probably one of the best looking games I've played to date, if you don't look at people's mouths and cutscenes, that is. The lip sync here is actually horrible, to the point where I can't pay attention to what Mia's actually saying because I'm just staring at her lips and her freakishly shaped teeth. Outside of the mouths though, this game is a looker thanks to the new RE engine. I'm not sure what black magic is behind this engine, but after being showcased here for the first time in Resident Evil 7, I can see why Capcom has moved all internal development to this engine, and it's really worked out for them, even to games like Monster Hunter. The detail in each area in this game is exquisite, and while there will always be some hiccups here and there with the occasional texture pop in and so on, the amount of environmental detail, ambient dust particles in the air, and lighting all knock it out of the park. Horror games rely on their environments to build up the fear and tension these games require, and with the attention to detail and fidelity of the environments, Resident Evil 7 really knocks it out of the park on this front. Seeing Ethan reload the pistol using his forearm as he no longer has a hand is a great example of this, as the reload takes much longer while he has one hand, all while Mia's rushing at you with a chainsaw. The state of the Baker estate, dilapidated, rotting, and in the state of condemnation, brings a scare factor even when nothing is actually happening to the player. The lack of music outside of a safe room also does wonders to build the tension to the player, only hearing the plodding of your footsteps while wandering the halls in this rotting husk that may once have been a pretty okay place to live makes each ambient footstep, creak, and house moan that much more intense, as breaks in the stillness creates that anxiety which we all fear, the fear of silence. Think about it. How often in your day-to-day life is it ever just quiet? There's always white noise going on around, the hum of your AC, your PC fan whirring, traffic passing on the streets around you, airplanes flying above your head. When it is silent, that is accompanied by a cause of unease, like something is wrong. Resident Evil 7 does a lot to weave its visuals and sound in order to keep the player on the back foot, tense about what could be next, and as a horror fan, this is the shit I live for. However, what is with this title song? While listening to the song in its entirety does become a bit eerie at the end, this beginning sequence has always felt weird and out of place to me, with this loud strings and reverberating vocals. It just never fit, and I had to get that off my chest at some point in this video. Now, after playing 8, this song does hit a little bit different, but all in good time, my friends. But while the space and sound may be great, what good is space if we don't have gameplay? So let's move over to the gameplay front of Resident Evil 7 and see how it stacks up.
I told you to stay out of here!
It's pretty amazing to me how well the core gameplay loop of Resident Evil as a franchise translates to a first-person setting, as all of the standard trappings are here with some twists thrown in to make it not feel so samey as its predecessors. Every system we have known and seen in the classic Resident Evil games are distilled down to their core in 7. Ammo is still in short supply, especially going into harder difficulties. Weapons no longer have an upgrade path. Herbs are similarly in shorter supply, I found. However, the lack of ammo and med strength are mitigated by combining herbs and gunpowder with chem fluid or strong chem fluid, forcing the player to make that all-important choice when finding some. Do I make ammo to kill, or do I make health to survive? This push and pull system has been sorely missed for me in the franchise in the latest centuries, and I'm happy to see it actually make a return here in 7. While red herbs are gone, I do think that combining the resources to make ammo and first aid juice was the right move, adding to a feeling of scarcity that is inherent in the survival horror genre like we've seen in the old games. Limiting the types of guns here I felt was a good choice as well, essentially only giving you a handgun, shotgun, flamethrower, grenade launcher, and the all-important Magnum. You do get a machine gun later towards the end of the game, but you don't have it for a very long time, and honestly this gun kind of sucks as it feels like you're just shooting them with peas. So this limitations of weapons makes each one stand out more, all having a special use case depending on the scenario. The flamethrower for scorching bugs, shotguns being great for crowd control, and your pistol being your natural bread and butter throughout the game. However, aiming in this game feels incredibly sluggish, and the speed that you pull the trigger felt the same. Have you ever fired a gun? I know that in my time shooting, I could probably shoot a 17+1 in the amount of time that Ethan takes to fire 4 rounds out of the pistol here in this game. While I feel this was done to create tension to the player, there being a part of me that wishes that I could just mag dump onto a molded. In fact, balance-wise, I think this may actually help the game, seeing as how sparse ammo can be. Allowing the player to burn through ammo if mashing the trigger at a fear or a jump scare may actually be an interesting experience, as this would lead to more resource churn and provide more tension through those lack of resources. Just a thought. My other major gripe is the speed at which Ethan actually moves throughout the house. Slow in plotting was the way of the original games, and in the general walk speed, I actually like how slow it is. It fits with the character and the situation given, as I know I wouldn't be speed walking like the mall grandmas if trapped in this hell house. However, much like Resident Evil 2 and 3, the Baker family roamed throughout the area in order to hunt you down and put an end to your trespassing, leading to many chase sequences, either scripted or just emergent while playing, if they tend to catch wind of you. The sprint here just feels too slow, as even when running full bore down a straight hallway, the speed at which the Bakers just walk will outstrip Ethan's ability to run, making running almost futile if caught. I do understand the reasoning for this, as the game is trying to incentivize you to run and tuck into a room and hide, and especially in the first section of the main house. That is almost impossible to do, as you need to run past Jack to get a key and then run past him again to unlock the door to the basement. This can happen quite often due to the cramped nature of the house, and while tense, never felt truly fair. Speaking of keys, we also see the return of key items that allows the player to further explore the house, and while not much more needs to be said, I'm glad to see these return to form, making exploring and backtracking a rewarding experience once again. Throughout the different areas of the house too, there are golden coins placed hidden throughout the home. The coins, if collected, can unlock upgrades to Ethan himself in the form of stims that can increase your health or reload speed. While not a drastic boost, these do feel worthwhile in order to add to your survivability, rewarding the players with a keen eye, or for those of us who use a guide. While the systems at play here in Resident Evil 7 are all ones that we've seen prior, this game really does well at taking the series back basics, and while I have some gripes with the guns and the movement, overall I found this game just pretty fun to play through again for this video, serving to both empower the player and breed tension player as well. Narratively, however, this game does stumble quite a bit, so let's get into the story and the DLCs to follow.
You know, I actually envy you. What? You don't believe me? This toy? Well, you can't fake this. It has taken me weeks to finish this, and it is finally ready. And it's all for you. Oh, come on now. Don't be like that. It's gonna be fun. Just you.
As we discussed before, Resident Evil 7 starts off fantastic in the guest house, and once being knocked out is when the game truly opens up. We're introduced to the 4 members of the Baker family: Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and the grandma, each with their own personalities, traits, most of all mutations. Jack, the patriarch of the family, large and brooding, is also slightly manic, fighting Ethan to hurt him over and over again, cackling maniacally and sacrificing himself in order to try to, kill Ethan. Marguerite has become bug-like, controlling mutated mosquitoes, creating her nest in the boathouse. losing her temper at the drop of a dime for someone not following her direction. She seems the most unstable of the group, requiring Jack to put her in her place pretty often. Lucas is their teenage son, hellbent on messing with any intruders by creating elaborate murder escape rooms not unlike something you would see in Saw. Sporting his Louisiana prison jacket, he's the sneakiest one of the family, who can also seemingly regenerate with the help of the mutation, much like how we see in Jack. This coming to the fore after he gets his hand cut off at dinner like it was nothing. Lastly, we have Grandma, who shows up randomly throughout the house, just staring, wide eyes boring to your soul while watching your progress. The first part of the game is split into areas for each of the three, the main house being controlled by Jack, the boathouse being controlled by Marguerite, and the workshop under Lucas's domain. We are introduced to Zoe back in the guest house, seemingly hiding away from the rest of her family, as they have all gone insane and are looking to kill her as well, despite her also being infected, as we will learn in a later DLC. Ethan wakes, tied to a chair at the dinner table, hands stapled back on, with a strange watch attached around the staples. This watch reflects his health, much like how the backline represented Isaac's health in Dead Space 1. Being treated to a gnarly dinner of rotting flesh and intestines, I think? We get the family dinner sequence that was seemingly made for anyone playing this game in VR, forcing the intestines into your face, prying Ethan's mouth open with a knife, and after the family boogies off, we attempt our grand escape. I love this scene as it does a great job at setting up the players for the story ahead, and as we will learn in the end, set up the main antagonist as well.
Come here, boy.
Shit, oh shit, oh shit, he's not eating it, Jack! He's not eating it!
Shut the hell up, Marguerite!
Save that for him!
Get the hell out of here!
You're a son of a bitch!
As we attempt to escape, Jack heads us off, and after escaping to the first safe room that's in the laundry room, we are contacted by Zoe again, telling Ethan to get to the trailer outside so she can maybe help him out. While searching for the key to the main foyer, a cop appears in the window, and after pleading with the suspicious cop to help, he hands Ethan a knife and says to meet him in the garage. In doing so and trying to explain the situation, which is obviously pretty hard to explain and really fucked up, our cop meets his untimely demise at the hands of Jack, where we have our first fight, eventually impaling him against a pipe in a garage by driving a car into it. We find the key to get into the main area of the house, finding keys, items, solving light puzzles, and upon his return with you in the bathroom, bow chicka bow wow, avoid a prowling Jack. Moving to the basement of the house, we discover the new type of enemy, the molded, essentially being morphed from living black mold that has infested the basement of the home. These guys are very reminiscent of the ooze in Resident Evil Revelations, this time colored black and less formed than their predecessors. Dropping from the ceilings, tucked in corners, and emerging from puddles of this mold, these guys alone pose little challenge. However, their ability to appear behind you, seemingly unknowingly, does well to keep you on edge. And if they swarm you, it's a pretty bad day. While not my favorite version of infected monsters by far, as they do feel generic and boring, blocking the hallway with their large forms forces Ethan to engage, using some of that sweet ammo that we've collected along the way. Making our way to the meat locker, we spot the item we need to head outside, the head of a dog, puzzle leading to the door outside. And in the reach for it, Ethan is ambushed by Jack once again, leading to a second fight with him, ending in a chainsaw duel to the death. This time, however, we get to battle the infection inside of him, as when he bends over, the mutation reveals itself, with Ethan taking the glorious chainsaw to it until it pops, leaving Jack with just 2 legs and exploded gore and goo. Escaping a locker and headed to the front door, we run into Granny again, in a subtle, unsettling scene where she just is sitting around a corner, only staring with no obvious way of how she got there. It just really creeps me the fuck out, if I'm being honest. Like some of the best horror is, where nothing happens and leaves the player with more questions by her presence than you get answers. Escaping to the yard and moving into the trailer, Ethan gets another call from Zoe, informing Ethan that Mia is still alive, but infected with the same virus as Baker's. In order for them to escape, Ethan must get the ingredients to make a serum to cure them both of the infection so it doesn't escape the bayou. She says her mother is the last one to have them, thus Ethan makes his way to the boathouse to locate the ingredients and recipe for the cure infection. Upon entering the boathouse, it becomes clear that this place is suffering from a different sort of infection than the main house, this time being overrun by tainted bugs, seemingly controlled by Marguerite, using her cracky lamp and loud screeches. This area is a lot smaller than the main house, so after navigating the multiple docks, rebuilding a flamethrower, and evading Marguerite, Ethan makes his way into her chambers, where he finds a shriveled up fetus and a recipe for the antidote, requiring parts from other test subjects to be made into a sort of goo that would cure the infection. However, the door is locked with a wait switch, one side sporting an unlit lamp, eerily similar to the one we've seen Marguerite tootle around with. Heading back to the main area and looking in a hole, we see a scrawny, deformed arm reach over and snatch the lantern, only to scratch a glimpse of the spider-like figure scurrying away into the hole. Giving chase to an abandoned home, Ethan encounters a fully mutated spider Marguerite crawling around the walls, bursting in and out of holes on the ceilings and floors, and scurrying around outside the building, only to be laid out after a long and honestly pretty annoying fight. The amount of time she hides to spawn more eggs or just does not appear into line of sight makes this fight drag on way longer than it needs to, and it's easily my least favorite one to do, even while I enjoy the spectacle of it. Lamp in hand, Ethan makes his way to Marguerite's room, where everything seems a little off. Being pitch black minus your flashlight, child laughter in the distance, Ethan reaches a child's room, finding a secret room behind a bed. We catch a glimpse of a small girl as well, both in full body and just her little toesy woesies, and after obtaining the sample fetus parts, the molded spring up to attack as Ethan mad dashes his way out of the area and back to the trailer. But a little girl? Huh, seems on the nose, but let's press on. Reaching the trailer, Ethan is greeted by Lucas, revealing how he now has Mia and Zoe both captured and needs to reach him in the workshop part of the house in order to free both of them. Being locked out, Ethan goes to the dead cop's body, and after digging in his neck hole, that once again seems played up for VR, we grab the key and head inside. After battling some molded, we enter the room where Lucas is hiding, one of his murder escape rooms. Astute observers may remember this from a videotape found earlier, where the cameraman from the first video of the show crew is locked away, solving puzzles that will inevitably lead to his ultimate demise. If you found this, you know the solutions, but if you don't, you're treated to a small series of rooms, locks, and puzzles, all ending in an explosion and chasing Lucas, where he escapes, and you run into Zoe and Mia all tied up. Ethan frees the pair, and as Zoe makes the serum, they're once again attacked by Jack, this time so disfigured and mutated he's hardly recognizable, minus the insults hurled your way. Taking this massive beast down requires, like most fights later in this series, the shooting of the orange pestils, and finally injecting Jack with one of the vials of serum that were made, leaving only one left. Ethan must make a choice, and your choice dictates what ending you actually get. However, while you make this choice, there's really only one that is canon, that being inject Mia and leave Zoe behind. While I do wish there wasn't a choice of canon here, the illusion of choice is kind of nice, if only truly surface level, and eventually retcon to only having one option. For those purposes, we will focus on the Mia choice of the story, as Zoe's is mostly the same, minus a separate set of events set prior to the game. Now, it is here that, for myself and many other fans of the series and maybe this game, Resident Evil 7 should have ended. It makes sense, right? We took out the three main bakers, leaving Grandma alone to be creepy, we saved Mia, and we're leaving the estate. With a tight 8 to 10 hours right here alone for just a regular playthrough filled with horror, puzzles, action, and every other trapping of Resident Evil, while there would be some loose ends like the girl and the grandma, Resident Evil 7 could have ended here and been a nice tight patch. However, and this is my main gripe with this game, we are only halfway through, so unfortunately, we must press on. Ethan and Mia, leaving Zoe on the dock, come across a giant ship stranded and beached in the swamps. They are then attacked by a girl named Evelyn, knocking out Ethan, and in this state, has a vision of Jack, normal, unaffected by the mutation, who tells Ethan that Evelyn was just a little girl they took in, but she is truly the root of all the events that transpired, their infection, the mold, and what happened to Mia, as she is able to control people using the infection she gives them. He begs Ethan that he and his family were once good people, brought to do horrible things due to this girl, and asks Ethan to kill her for him. We switch to Mia's perspective, being captured on the ship itself, and begin searching for Ethan. While she moves through the ship, she has visions of Evelyn, begging her to come back to her and be her mommy as she was before. Mia has no recollection, and upon reaching the captain's deck, Evelyn forces Mia to watch a videotape of how everything began. Turns out that Mia was actually in charge of Evelyn once, working for an unknown corporation who created Evelyn with the infection and was planning to deploy her somewhere in Central America in order to test her out. This all goes awry when Evelyn escapes, causing the tanker to flip while infecting everyone on board, all to force Mia to be her mommy. Mia resists and the boat goes aground in Louisiana, and both Mia, who is now infected, and Evelyn have been taken to the bakers. Present-day Mia realizes that it was because of her that Evelyn is the way she is, and feels responsible for the incidents that occurred, most of all bringing Ethan into this entire mess. Finally locating him at the bottom of the ship, she forces Ethan out of the boat, sealing herself inside with Evelyn, succumbing to her own fate. Ethan, ever-determined boyfriend, makes his way through the mines, discovering along the way the truth about what Evelyn was, that being part of the E-series of virus meant to control and destroy a community or country from within, with the power of mind control mold. Being always alone, Evelyn grew to have an obsession with wanting to have family, hence the forcing of Mia to be her mother and subjecting the bakers to be her new family. Well, we also learned that Lucas, while infected, was also working with a different shadow company and had a serum that allowed him to resist the mind control effects, allowing him to freely research Evelyn and the virus as well. With the samples of Evelyn's DNA handed to him by Mia on the boat, Ethan was able to create an antidote that would destroy Evelyn if injected. Eventually, Ethan makes his way back to the farm farmhouse, battling tons of molded, and eventually Evelyn's powers as well, and upon injecting her with the antidote, realizes it is actually Granny Baker the entire time. Being injected unleashes the power within the virus, causing Evelyn to mutate into a massive creature, destroying the house. As Ethan struggles to fight back, he is saved by a helicopter bearing the Umbrella logo, and after the monster's destruction, a revamped Chris Redfield appears to put Ethan into the helicopter to go to safety. We see Mia in there as well, both safe from the horrors of the swamp and head off into the literal sunrise. Overall, Resident Evil 7 for the first half game is peak horror. Contending with the Bakers, each in their own motif and style of infection, brings these characters to the fore that Resident Evil has never really accomplished before outside of Wesker himself. The house to me is peak Resident Evil in this game, with its winding hallways, locked rooms, dilapidated structure allowing for quick escapes, and the battles with Jack and the other Baker family members are all tense and honestly creepy. Marguerite, while annoying, is not much to contend with in the boathouse. Being able to just run by her and tanking her bug swarm to your safety ends up being a spectacle of a fight, if not annoying. Going through Lucas's domain brings the puzzles solving to the fore, and having a change of pace here keeps the game pretty interesting. With pretty excellent pacing, not being anywhere for too long where it overstays its welcome, this first half of the game keeps everything fresh and moving with some phenomenal set pieces along the way. Where this game falls apart is after the choice of who to save. The boat sequence feels like it lasts forever, and with the introduction of the machine gun in this area as well, makes everything feel like a shoot fest rather than a tension-filled horror house that we got in the Baker estate. And after playing through it once as Mia, you go through it again as Mia, this time with everything broken. It feels like it lasts forever. It really sucks the fun out of everything that this game had going for it. Then blasting through the mines as Ethan also feels overwinded, being a pure combat sequence that honestly I just tried to sprint through rather than fight, despite having the slowest sprint known to man. The introduction of Evelyn as the catalyst for everything would have been better if not campy as all hell, focused solely on finding a family and yelling that everyone was her mommy, daddy, brother, or sister. Plus, his ability to teleport everywhere really breaks the groundedness that this game had thus far. I know that's weird to say for Resident Evil, but still there it is. But think about it, having a mold that mutates and infects a family is honestly a way more interesting premise than a little girl who makes the mold by puking and is also trying to infect everyone around her to take care of her. The whole Evelyn story just felt like a strange left turn, one that honestly wasn't needed. I'm also of two opinions of the reintroduction of Chris at the end of the game and subsequently in a DLC. On one hand, it's nice to see Redfield again, especially after his turmoil he contended with in his own head during the events of Resident Evil 6. However, there's a side of me that really wishes that this game was completely segmented off from the rest of the franchise, giving the series a new start with a new style of game. A lot could be said for Ethan as a protagonist, and while I understand many of the critiques about him being whiny, constantly confused, perpetually delayed his thought process, and generally not the smartest of heroes, and despite all this, I like Ethan as a protagonist, as he's a far cry from any of the heroes we've had in the franchise thus far. Portrayed as an everyman hero of the series, he is a man with no training, just searching for his girlfriend who's been missing for 3 years, who's been thrust into this batshit scenario that, let's be honest, most of us wouldn't really know how to deal with either. And while he suffers from a massive appendage injury that is seemingly cured by first aid water and staples, there's always need to have a suspension of disbelief when playing games. And incidentally, this also gets answered in the next installment of the series, as Ethan is also the first protagonist to have a back-to-back entry in the series. Even with such little time, it's easy to sympathize with how Ethan reacts and comments to the events around him. I'm glad to see his return in 8 as well, and I hope that Resident Evil keeps having more of the everyman protagonist approach approach rather than gritty, hardened soldiers. Resident Evil 7 also had a ton of DLC support as well, and a lot of it was actually pretty good. Starting off with the banned footage series, which is just a series of mini experiences that adds some new content to the package. The two biggest standout are Bedroom and Daughters. Bedroom follows Clancy, the cameraman that was seen in the first found tape at the beginning of the game, locked in a room in Marguerite's boathouse. The entire experience boils down to another escape room, having the player solve a series of puzzles, all while paying attention to the time in order to hide in bed as Marguerite comes periodically to come and check on her prey. If she catches you out of bed or catches something in the room that's off, she either makes you eat intestines or hurts you, and if this happens 3 times, you lose and have to restart. This mode is by far one of my favorites, due mainly to the tension built with having to jump back into the bed, hook yourself back up to your handcuffs as you hear Marguerite clomping up the stairs to you. The other one, Daughters, is a lore-heavy experience, focused on the day the Bakers changed, bringing Evelyn into their home. Taking place through the eyes of Zoe, it's interesting to watch how the Bakers changed to become the monsters we know them as, all due to them taking a little girl who seemed to be needing help. It adds another layer to the Baker story and honestly made me feel even worse for them in their eventual conclusion. I mean, they're just trying to do a nice thing, and this is the thanks that they get? Fuck, dude. It makes me not want to help anybody ever again. We also have some smaller things to take up time, like a game of poker with Lucas or feeding Jack for his 55th birthday, and while fun for a bit, don't stick around long in either a gameplay front or a lore front. 2 more releases followed, however, Not a Hero and End of Zoe. Not a Hero follows Chris Redfield directly after saving Ethan, in a much more action-packed focus experience. Chasing Lucas due to his involvement with virus research, Chris battles his way through the mines, saving his fellow members, or not saving for the most part, of the new PMC Umbrella Corp, whose mission now is to stop bioterrorism via force, keeping the Umbrella name in order to atone for their past mistakes in creating the T-Virus. While short, the culmination of taking Lucas out after his mutation is a fun romp, even if it's pretty straightforward as it sounds. End of Zoe, on the other hand, takes place following the Not a Hero DLC. Umbrella now having set up a cordon area around the Baker estate in order to analyze the infection occurring there. You play as Joe Baker, brother of Jack, alligator hunter, and family man. Joe finds Zoe encased in crystal and being taken by Umbrella in order to get her cured and researched. Being chased by other mold mutants, Joe takes Zoe across the bayou, looking for a cure, taking on Molded with nothing but his bare hands. While pretty fun to punch the shit out of some Molded, this story basically begins and ends with the final showdown with Jack once again in a new mutated form, a boxing form. Duking it out with fisticuffs, Joe eventually gets a cure and Zoe comes back to life and is free of the infection. While none of these add a ton of meaningful plot to the package, having these side additions to further explore the world in the setting of Resident Evil is always welcome. And playing everything for this video, still had a great time just playing them. But at the end of the day, how was Resident Evil 7 as a package and entry into the series? Honestly, it's probably one of my favorites. With the introduction of a true attempt to bring some horror to the series, the almost seamless transition to the first-person horror, and bringing the tenets of the original Resident Evils to bear in this title, it is still a treat to go back to, even having played it about 7 to 8 times through the multiple consoles, from Xbox to PC, and even on VR for a bit. The inclusion of interactive lore and backstory in the VHS tapes was an awesome addition, weaving these in with cool flair, and while long in the tooth towards the end, the first half of the game is almost peak horror, taking bits and pieces from the renaissance of horror gaming we received over the years since the release of Resident Evil 6 and bringing them to 7. This game did a lot to revitalize the series, and it showed in both fan and critical reception. Resident Evil hits almost all the high notes, and even with its missteps at the end of the game, it is definitely worth your time in playing for either the first time or going back for another stroll through the Baker estate. But what did you guys think of Resident Evil 7? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more gaming and retrospective content like this one. I do interact with everybody in the comments down below, so please leave your feedback as I truly adore reading them while sitting on the toilet at work. Next on deck, we have Resident Evil 8, which is another that I'm super mixed on, so just stay tuned for that one. Until next time, thank you for your time. My name is Brendan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.
Welcome to the family, son.